Hi, my name is Ananya, and this is my Talaria research project, and presented by me. My mentor was Professor Shivani Arasu, and the field that I did research in was humanities and specifically gender studies and analyzing the labor force. So, first, this is a quick overview of what I studied. The main title, or the actual title of my research paper, is Investigating the Link Between Educational Disparities and Female Employment Gaps Worldwide. I chose this topic because I was really interested in women's education, and I do a lot of work around that. And so I wanted to kind of learn how the disparities we see in women's education worldwide impact their participation in the labor force or the distribution of jobs, and so I wanted to see how that might directly correlate to things in the future. So the main sections of my research paper are the abstract, the introduction, the methodology, discussion, conclusion, and references. So for the abstract, I mainly explored the global link between gendered educational disparities and women employment outcomes. This was mainly focusing on developing countries because there they have many systematic barriers that restrict girls' access to education. And I primarily conducted my actual research using data from the World Bank and UNESCO. And after conducting my research, I was able to identify a strong positive correlation between female education levels and women's labor force participation. And this really highlights implications for GDP growth, maybe maximizing human capital, and how a nation can become more productive by encouraging more women to participate in the labor force. And then this is a picture of my abstract. So, for my introduction, I mainly wrote about gendered educational inequality and how it kind of remains one of the biggest problems worldwide. And one connection I emphasized was how, despite there being rising tertiary enrollment in schools, there were still many regional gaps that kind of varied from country to country or within a country itself. And so, for example, in sub Saharan Africa, there was a lot of STEM underrepresentation, even though they had very high enrollment rates in school for girls. And I also identified that the female labor participation rate is about 48.8% versus 75% for men, which is a huge difference. And this reflects a 24-point gap. Additionally, women also occupy only 30% of senior roles, despite large numbers of tertiary graduates. And tertiary graduates are essentially individuals who go to like grad school. And so, despite there being many women who graduate with degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, there's only 30% of women who are actually occupying senior roles. So this kind of shows the disparity between women and what men in specific types of roles as well. And this study kind of situates itself within the disparities regarding structural discrimination and intersectional feminist theory. So, for the methodology, the primary data source I used was the World Bank Data Bank, which kind of integrated data from UNESCO, the ILO, and the UNICEF datasets. And the reason I chose this was because I wanted to have global comparability within my data, and it had a wide temporal coverage, and so it covered data from the 1970s to 2024, and it was almost 100% complete. It had less than 5% missing data, but most of it was complete. And there were many indicators that I could kind of select and choose based on how I wanted to collect my data. So I focused on female versus male enrollment ratios, literacy rates in those countries, labor force participation, and wage employment. And they had descriptive statistics, and they had means, dispersion, and scatter plots to help me map enrollment versus enrollment trends. And I used Pearson's R for correlation and produced some bar charts and regression lines collecting this data and then kind of graphically representing it, which I'll show later on in the presentation. So these are the figures I made when I was doing my data analysis. Because this research paper is not so STEM focused, like it's not biology research or other sort of heavy science-based research, I had to primarily rely on data that was already on the internet. And so that's why I used the World Bank, because it was a reliable source and they had a huge bank of data. And so I kind of compared different types of data and produced my own graphs through like presenting them graphically in various ways. So as you can see here, there's like line graphs, there's scatter plots, there's also this other type of graph. And so I kind of demonstrated different connections in each. So the one right here, it says educational attainment by gender. So I was comparing men versus women in attaining education. And then human capital index is another thing I graphed, which has led to a very interesting identification of something that I had never known before. And so I think this research study also kind of helped me learn some correlations that I didn't expect to be present when doing this research. So, for the discussion, I kind of focused on general takeaways and then also a paradox, which is what I discovered through analyzing the Human Capital Index or HCI. So, for general discussion, I kind of focused on how the female and male labor force fell from 60 to 80% to 40 to 50%, primarily due to COVID-19. So, both genders were impacted. However, many women were like in caretaker roles and things like that. And so they were impacted even more than men were. So, that also kind of shows how gender can influence the employment rates of men versus women, even in things like pandemics or other situations that can't be controlled. So there was a persistent male advantage in tertiary attainment, and it kind of reveals long-term structural barriers and how women are kind of discouraged from obtaining an education. Many of these countries that I analyzed, they primarily had cultural barriers, and so a lot of the cultural culture behind women's education was that women should not have access to education. They should focus on bearing children or being housewives, and so that's something that predominantly prevented women from obtaining education. And so this really highlights the need for policy reform and more attention towards how we can actually maximize the participants in our labor force to really increase the GDP of a nation and to really make sure the economy flourishes. So the human capital index paradox was something that I had discovered, and it was something that I'd like to further study outside of this research paper. And so I noticed that despite women scoring zero point 0.1 points higher than men, when considering like human capital index, which is how capable an individual is of contributing to the labor force and how much like human capital can one person provide. And so women were scoring higher than men, even though they were underemployed. So that kind of shows that women have the potential to contribute more in terms of human capital, yet they're still underemployed. And so I thought this was interesting because it shows that despite women having potential, they're not really encouraged to participate in the labor force, even though encouraging them would really make the GDP and the economy of a nation flourish. And so this kind of links to the leaky pipeline theory that's very dominant in gender studies, which is that women drop out of advancement pathways despite equal or higher qualifications because of a lack of a supportive environment around women's employment and women's education. So the conclusion that I made was that there is a direct relationship between girls' education access and women's employment, but there are structural barriers that still persist. And it kind of introduces this new paradox, the HCI paradox, which kind of demonstrates high potential yet low opportunity. And I think this requires deeper investigation. So this is something that I think kind of segues into a new field of research or a new topic that could be studied. And it also kind of shows that we need more stronger recommendations for integrated strategies to improve schooling, also remove discriminatory hiring like gender-based bias, and also strengthening family and work supports. And most of these reforms can only be made through the government or educational level. So, kind of just pressurizing larger entities to implement these changes would really allow us to see a larger representation of women in the workforce. These are my references. And I just wanted to talk about my experience with this program. So I didn't really have that much research experience. I do a lot of independent research, but I never really had a mentor to help guide me. So I think a lot of my research was just my thoughts, what like my experience from like school and things like that. But I never really had a mentor. So I think being part of this program was such a great experience because I finally could learn what it was like to have a mentor, like helping me out throughout the process, and what like doing actual qualified research was like. And I'm really, really grateful to my mentor, Professor Shivani Arasu, because she helped me a lot when determining what I should make for my topic and what I could focus on. And at the start, I was kind of confused on what exactly I should focus on, and I had such a broad topic. But then she kind of encouraged me to look into specific areas, specific countries, and like specific correlations. So that really, really helped me narrow down what I wanted to study and kind of made this all possible. So I really wanted to thank my mentor for all her experience and all her support. And I do want to thank everyone at Talaria for putting together such an amazing summer program. I'm so glad I found this. And yeah, I'm really going to encourage anyone I know to sign up for this program because it's free, which I really do appreciate. And I love how you guys are like encouraging girls to participate in more research. So yeah, thank you for all of this. And I'm really glad to be part of this program. And yeah, thank you for listening to my presentation. If you have any questions, please email me, and my email's right here. Thank you.